When was the last time you reached for a brown ink color for your floral card? Well, today I'm stepping out of my comfort zone away from the regular pinks and purples with this Altenew's nostalgic floral bundle and creating a warm, earthy color palette using some fun browns and greens. I will also walk you through my thought process as we balance a soft ink blended background with a clean white space while adding just enough depth to make our focal blooms shine. So grab your favorite warm drink and let's get crafting. Let us first take a look at this nostalgic florals bundle from Altenew. Now, this one includes a beautiful 6 by 8 inch stamp set, which features the elegant floral arrangements, some foliage, and coordinating sentiments. Well, I absolutely love the font on these sentiments. We have thinking of you, love, wow, you did it, huge congrats. I think it's absolutely versatile. Then we also have coordinating stencils, which make adding color and dimension to the floral super easy. I'll be using that for our project today. While the coordinating dies allow you to cut out the stamped designs effortlessly and add dimension to all your projects. Now, I love how these three products work together, giving you so many possibilities for creating beautiful floral cards. I decided to use one of the larger flowers as the main focal point for our card today. I'll start by stamping the flower onto an A2 size card panel. I love that the packaging includes some fun inspirations to get you started. Not only does it feature beautiful card designs, but it also gives you some great color combinations to inspire your own projects. You could definitely use repeat stamping or most of those foliages on the stamp set to create a beautiful floral background. But when I have a stamp set with a gorgeous large floral image like this one, I prefer to let it take the center stage. So for the card today, I'm using just this one large floral image as the main focal point, keeping the rest of the card design super clean and simple without overcrowding the card front with too many additional images. I started by stamping my large floral image onto an A2 size card panel using the Obsidian Black Pigment ink by Altenew. Now, I do stamp my images twice, and once I had the image stamped nicely, I sprinkle some clear embossing powder over it, and I will be heat setting it to get those beautiful glossy finish. I'd say that by now this has almost become my signature techniques because I really love the way it makes the focal point image or even the sentiments stand out. I especially like using pigmenting for this because it gives me those nice bold stamped lines, and the clear embossing powder adds that extra bit of shine and dimension without changing the color of the image. Now, I also like to do the same with my sentiments as well. Now, be it embossing with a clear embossing powder on black ink or even gold heat embossing. You'll see me using this technique quite often in my card making. It's a simple little step, but I think it makes such a difference in your finished card, especially in my finished card, as compared to using a dye ink, which gives more of a matte finish. A couple of things to keep in mind if you're heat embossing your stamped image is first, do not forget to run your anti-static powder tool over the panel before stamping. This helps prevent the embossing powder from sticking to areas where you don't want it to. The second tip is about your heat tool. Now, make sure it's nice and hot before you start, and then keep it moving as you heat set your embossing powder. Try not to hold it in one spot for too long because that can cause the cardstock to warp or overheat. These little steps make the heat embossing process so much more smoother and give you a nice clean result every time. Another tip would be to give your panel a moment to cool down and let that melted embossing powder set before moving on to the next step. Whether you're going to ink blend over the image or use a coordinating die to cut it out, letting everything cool completely will help prevent any smudging or damage to that beautiful embossed finish. Now, I personally like to do my die cutting before adding any color. That way, I know exactly how the finished piece is going to look when it's cut. And I don't want to have to worry about accidentally ruining a perfectly colored image while die cutting it at the very end. It also makes the coloring process a little easier for me since I can work with the image already cut out and focus entirely on getting those colors just right. I placed my die cut floral image onto my ultra sticky mat, and now we are ready to bring in some color. For today's florals, I'm going to bring in a fun combination of warm browns, which is definitely an unusual choice for me when it comes to coloring in my florals. But I was really excited to see how this one would come together. Now I'm using the Desert Dreams Fresh Dye Ink set by Altenew, and I'll be working with three shades from this set. We have Apricot Frost, Cocoa Cream, and Choco Hazelnut. Now I'm starting with the lightest shade and gradually building up the deeper tones to give these flowers some beautiful depth and dimension. You could definitely use alcohol markers, color pencils, or even watercolors to bring this beautiful floral image to life. But for today, I'm using the coordinating stencils. These stencils are really easy to line up, and I love that they are labeled so you can know exactly which layer goes to which part of the floral image. Now, I started with apricot frost and blended it with a very light circular motions using my smaller blending brushes, working from the center of the flower towards the tips of the petals. I intentionally kept more of that color concentrated around the center and gradually softened it as I moved towards the tip. This gives the petals a natural gradient and adds that beautiful depth without making the color look too heavy. With each of those stencil layers, I gradually built up the color. I started with apricot frost as my lightest shade, followed by cocoa cream, and finally brought in the darkest shade, which is choco hazelnut. I concentrated the darkest color more towards the center of each of those petals, which helped to create a beautiful gradient and gave the flowers a more depth and dimension while still keeping those petal tips nice and soft. Now, I did use some post-it notes to mask off the edges. Once I was done with my flowers, I moved on to the leaves. For the leaves, I'm using my absolute go-to color combination from the Mediterranean Glow set. This time, I decided to switch things up a little and start from the tips of the petals instead. I began with honeydew glow at the tips and then gradually brought in the darker shades, which is olive and sugar kelp, working from the base of each of the leaves. My flower center, I brought in some fun warm yellows to add a little contrast to those earthy florals. I used lemonade stand as the lighter shade and then added a bit of raw amber to deepen the centers and make them really stand out. At this point, I was really happy with how this floral image turned out. You could definitely take it a step further and use your alcohol markers to add even more shading and depth to the flowers. But for today, I decided to leave it as is. I really wanted to keep this design clean and simple, so I felt like a soft stencil layer gave me just the right amount of color and dimension without adding too much detail. Instead of adding more shading to the floral image, I decided to bring in some beautiful color to the background. For this, I'm using the same brown ink family to create a soft ombre effect that complements our florals. Now, I started with the lightest shade and ink blended it across almost three quarters of the panel, gradually working my way into the darker shades. I finished with choco hazelnut, which is the darkest brown, and keeping that deepest color concentrated right along the base of the panel. Now, I'm using one of my larger ink blending brushes, which gives an absolute smooth transition. I love how this gives the background a beautiful transition while still keeping our overall design super clean and simple. For a little bit of texture and contrast on this otherwise clean and simple card, I decided to add some splatters to the background. You could definitely use your black watercolor for this, but I'm using a little dabs of black spray and simply tapping my nozzle to scatter some tiny drops across the panel. I love how the subtle splatters adds just the right amount of visual interest without taking away from our beautiful floral focal point. I will let this panel dry completely before I go ahead and stamp my sentiment on the panel. With such a large floral image, I usually like to keep my sentiments small and subtle, either on a little sentiment label or stamped directly onto the open areas of the card. Now, for this card, I chose a tiny sentiment that says, "Wishing you a beautiful day." This is from an older Build Your Garden set, Nature's Magic set. And well, I stamped the sentiment right about the floral focal point. I positioned it right along the transition between the white space and the brown ink blended background so it overlaps both the areas and ties the whole design together. And again, for this one, I did stamp it with obsidian black ink and then I heat set it with clear embossing powder. Now, after we stamp our sentiments, we can call this card done. But before that, I just wanted to share a quick giveaway detail. You can now get $5 off on orders over $55 using my code REVATI5 off. I'll have all the details and more information in the description box below. Well, moving on to our card, once I stamped the sentiment, I trimmed my ink blended panel quite a bit, leaving a generous white border around the edges. I then used foam tape to pop this background panel onto an A2 size card base. Finally, I used liquid glue to adhere my floral focal point right onto the ink blended background And I love how that little bit of dimension helps the flowers stand out while keeping the overall design very clean and simple. I decided not to add any sequins to this card because I felt the splatters already gave us enough visual contrast for this otherwise clean and simple design. But I couldn't resist adding a little shine and sparkle. So instead of using a sequin mix, I decided to bring that sparkle directly to my flower. I am using my glitter brush pen to add a few little touches of sparkle around the flower center. It's subtle, but just enough to catch the light and add that finishing touch without taking away from the simplicity of the card. And with that, our clean and simple floral card is complete. I hope you enjoyed this project and found the tips and tricks I shared helpful. These are some of the little things I keep in mind whenever I create my cascade designs. And don't forget about the $5 off on orders over $55 using my code REVATI5 off. I'll have the giveaway details in the description box below, along with links to all the supplies that I used to create this project. Please know that all of those links will be affiliate links, which means that if you shop using one of my links, I'll get a small commission at no cost to you guys. Thank you again for joining me today. Until next time, stay safe.